Ladies and gentlemen, Violent Games here. Today, I wanted to do a brief Let's Talk about Resident Evil's one-shot demo. Let's Talk is a series I do where I just fire from the hip and talk about different topics in gaming. So today, I just wanted to give you my impressions of the Resident Evil one-shot demo, like I said before, Reiteration City. So, without reiterating too many times, I love this game. I think it's fantastic already. I feel like really, it kind of all boils down to one salient point, if I am to be honest. But let's get the obvious praise out of the way. The game looks gorgeous, the game plays gorgeous, the controls are really, really tight, the frame rate being at 60 definitely highlights everything good about this game. I really love the way it looks and feels. However, the salient point that drives this game home, and is really the bartering chip on whether or not you should buy this game, is do you like classic Resident Evil games? Because if the answer is yes, buy this shit immediately. It's fantastic. And to be honest, there's no reason you shouldn't play the one-shot demo if you're even remotely interested. So you're probably not even looking at this video for the sake of figuring out for yourself. But I really do feel like if you like the classic games, you're going to fall in love with this. It's like impossible not to. Like, think about the level design and how it's so similar to the Resident Evil 1 mansion. And I will be making comparisons to Resident Evil 1 rather than 2. I actually never played the classic Resident Evil 2. I was waiting for this remake, actually, because I heard about it like years ago, and I was just hoping that one day they would actually make it. And they did, and it wound up being something a lot more profound than I thought. And yeah, think of the level design from like Resident Evil 1, where you had a bunch of linear hallways, but those hallways were well done, they were filled with content, and there was constant puzzles, and there was a lot of backtracking that you had to do to unlock more and more areas of the mansion as you got more keys and things like that. All of that is present in this game, and it feels so wonderful to play a game. Like, when you're playing this game, even though it's modernized, you feel like you're playing a classic Resident Evil game. And by and large, that is not a bad thing. I feel like a lot of games are escaping what made the classics good, and this game does not. This game embraces all of the things that made classic Resident Evil games good. It has the typewriters. It has the inventory box. It has the same sound effects in menus. It has the limited inventory space. This game, like I don't know, it proves to me that Capcom is really aware of what made those classic Resident Evil games good. Now, when it comes to the modern features, if I was to compare it to any of the RE games or Resident Evil games, re-games, if I'm to compare it to any of the re-games, I have to compare it to Resident Evil 4, because it has that same type of third-person view, but it's just so polished. It's just so polished and wonderful. This really does feel like a true sequel to Resident Evil 4. It feels like this is the game that should have followed up instead of Resident Evil 5 and 6, which really took on different tones. And while I loved 6 for being kind of a B horror movie in a lot of ways, it wasn't a good Resident Evil game per se. So that is really it as far as, you know, my impressions of the Resident Evil one-shot demo. Did you like the classic games? If the answer is yes, then this is a no-brainer. The way the levels are put out, the way the gameplay works, limited resources, a bunch of puzzles. It's a classic horror game. That's what it is, and I love that. I love that I'm gonna get to play a classic horror game again in 2019 of all years. It's really cool, and I'm glad that Capcom is still supporting these games. You know, survival horror is a very unsupported genre, so any contribution that we can get is usually something I'm interested in. I'm very lenient with horror games, in all honesty. I let them get away with a lot of things. Now, granted, there is some classic jank to it. Like, for example, the voice acting seems very straightforward and not that great or interesting, but that's what classic horror games were. They had really shitty voice acting. It wasn't really on point, and this is definitely better than that, but you get what I'm saying. There's a little jank in there, and the cheesiness of it is what I will say. There's a lot of cheesiness, like kind of classic horror cheese, and I don't think it's a bad thing. It actually adds some charm to it. That's just my taste, though. One thing I will say on the negative front is Would I have liked the game to be in first person? The answer is yes. Resident Evil 7, like if I'm comparing this demo to Resident Evil 7, I honestly prefer the design of Resident Evil 7, the base campaign anyhow. I didn't play any of the DLCs because they looked like trash, honestly. It looks like they completely fucking threw what made the Resident Evil 7 main campaign out, like just completely out the window, and went for something more action-packed, I guess. And that's not me. That's not the Resident Evil 7 I fell in love with. But that's neither here nor there. I'm trying to compare it. Look, I'm losing sight of everything. That's what happens in Let's Talks. But overall, I have to say a first-person perspective does dominate a third-person one. Because when you put someone in a first-person setting, one, it's more immersive. You have less sense around you. When you put a character in third person, and especially in a horror game, it gives you a lot of leeway to kind of peek around corners and stuff. And when a game is kind of put in that really linear setting of you're going through the same type of corridors and those corridors are tight, there's less tension with third person because you can like angle the camera around corners. You can kind of see what's ahead of you. You have a lot of control of what's going on around you at all times. You'll know if a zombie's behind you most of the time. So I feel like that kind of limits the tension that can, you know, happen within that space. And I feel like it makes that space less, you know, impactful. But that does not detract that this game isn't amazing. I'm so pumped for this game. That's really the only nitpick is that I have is that I wish it was a first-person game, but hey, we don't always get what we want. And a lot of people are probably excited that this is more of a traditional Resident Evil game versus Resident Evil 7, and there's nothing wrong with that opinion. Anyways, guys, this is Violent Games. That's all of my thoughts wrapped up for Resident Evil 2's remake. I'm trying not to get them mixed up. I do this all the time. Yeah. Let me know if you played the demo. If you have any thoughts, if you think I left something out, feel free to let me know. Look, I barely got to explore that demo. I know people have probably tore into it better than I did because I'm a degenerate, but that's neither here nor there. I appreciate you all stopping by. This is Violent Games signing off. I'm so pumped for survival horror. We need more of it. I want more games industry. It's so fun.